And I think in part that's why it's so tough being a parent, because you can go to work and put on your game face and make all kinds of pronouncements. And I mean, if they work with you long enough, they'll still see through that. But in home, you can't. They won't buy it for 2 seconds.
This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam, and I'm your host. And joining me, as always, Dr. Richard Blackaby.
I can't thank you enough for having me on this podcast, Sam.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine, Richard. We've been doing this for, I think, maybe 6 years now.
I know. It never gets old.
It never does. Each new day, I just wake up with anticipation. With what nugget of wisdom am I going to walk away with today? And
we got nuggets, Sam. We got more to come.
And today is no different, of course. This is a special. We're going to do a special Father's Day edition. Yep. So we're going to talk to all the fathers and dads out there. Before we do, though, I want to let folks know that we do have a coupon, if you will, for our recently released Introduction to Spiritual Leadership Coaching. Yeah. That's available at blackabyinstitute.com. And if you use code PODCAST, you can get that for free for the first few folks who are able to do that. And again, it's just it's a brief class, but it's kind of an overview of what we do at these spiritual leadership coaching workshops.
Yeah.
You've I'm sure heard us talk about before on the podcast, but we just want to make you aware of that, and I'll leave links for that in the show notes. And it's a great way to just sort of get an idea of what is coaching not, and how might you apply this, where you are, even if you don't consider yourself a coach. So so check that out for sure. We'll leave links in the show notes.
And it's free.
And it's free.
Yep.
And so Father's Day is right around the corner, and so we want to take. Do
you have a gift yet for your dad?
My presence is
your
present enough, I think. Yeah. No, I need to figure that out.
Oh yeah. And you have a good dad, so.
Yeah, well, and it's it's tough at this stage because it's like, well, what
Yeah, a man who has everything.
Yeah, what do you get a guy who's got it all? Yeah, great kids and all the rest of it.
Like,
so
for me, you can at least come and fix something for me. That's a gift.
Yeah.
But like your dad can fix his own stuff. So.
Yeah. I'll move heavy furniture. I feel like is a good one. I think that's always appreciated.
I think if you're creative enough, you can still find something that is nice to do. So.
I think so.
Yeah. I'll let you keep working on me as a father-in-law.
Oh, yeah. No,
is there a father-in-law day, or is that just, or do we get lumped in with fathers?
I think you get lumped in. I don't think father-in-laws get a special day.
Yeah. It would be special.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I wanted to, this is a special day, and we don't necessarily do a podcast for every day like this, but this is a leadership podcast, and to be honest, and I've said before, I think one of the most challenging leadership roles a man, at least, will ever have is to be a dad. And I could say, in terms of women, just being a parent. There's all kinds of leadership roles you can have in business, in your career, in sports, and nonprofits, many different areas. But without a doubt, I think being a parent is going to push you as a parent or as a leader and present challenges for you, unlike any other setting that you'll ever be in. Mm-hmm. And we've referenced this in years past, but even very well-known leaders, business leaders, people like Rockefeller, who was brilliant in terms of leading men and companies and making money, and yet he was estranged from one of his daughters that just wanted nothing to do with him. And whether that was Ronald Reagan bringing down the Iron Curtain with Soviet Union, he had a daughter that he was estranged from, and so many examples. I've mentioned this before, but Theodore Roosevelt had a very strong-willed daughter named Alice, and they at one point someone asked him and said, "Why don't you do something about your daughter Alice?" And his response was, I can do something about Alice, or I can be the president of the United States, but I can't do both. And so I'm just reminded that even people that have been celebrated as leaders, oftentimes their Waterloo has been with their kids. And there's lots of reasons for that we might get into. But I wanted to read a passage here from Proverbs chapter 4 in the beginning, and then just kind of highlight particularly one aspect of fathering that I think is very important. And so Proverbs 4, beginning verse 1, it says, "Listen, sons, to a father's discipline, and pay attention." By the way, that discipline, whenever you hear that word, we think of like spanking, we think about timeouts or discipline. But I think much of discipline is the idea of disciplining yourself, of organizing yourself, showing restraint. And I think, sometimes I think we overemphasize the punishment side of discipline. But I think a lot of what a dad in particular needs to do with his kids is teach his children self-control, to not chase after every whim and fancy, and to be in control of oneself and one's appetites and so on. I think, and so it says, so this father's discipline, he says, "Pay attention so that you may gain understanding, for I am giving you good instruction," which again,
a dad would say that.
Yeah, this is all really good for you. But of course, it does challenge us to say, in context of what we'll talk about here just in a moment. So we all, if we are in contact with our kids, if we have them in our home, then we are instructing them in one way or another. We are giving them a lesson, whether it could be a bad lesson, could be. I've had a number of friends that their basic goal in their manhood was to not be their dad, to not raise their kids the way their dad raised them. And so we're all giving a lesson of some kind, whether good or bad.
Well, and I that makes me just think that like you're probably giving two lessons. One is the lessons that you verbalize, and the other is the lesson that you live, which is hopefully saying the same thing that your words are. But as you and I both know, that's not always the case.
And I think in part that's why it's so tough being a parent, because you can go to work and put on your game face and make all kinds of pronouncements, and I mean, if they work with you long enough, they'll still see through that. But in home, you can't. They won't buy it for 2 seconds. They know you too well, and so you have to. And of course, that's why oftentimes kids reject our parenting, because they see right through us and realize we're not even practicing what we're preaching to them. But so it says, verse 3, he says, "When I was a son with my father, tender and precious to my mother, he taught me and said," and so the writer here of Proverbs 4 is saying, now what I'm going to tell you is what my dad told me, which is always always powerful to me, because what it's saying is, now if it hadn't worked, if it hadn't been true, probably he wouldn't have been passing it on. But he's saying, I'm going to pass on what my dad told me, because I'm old enough now to know that he was right, and that what he told me was wise counsel, and so I'm passing it on to you. So he says, your heart must hold on to my words. And of course that means that you can give all the advice in the world, but if your kids reject it, if they don't practice it, then it doesn't matter how good of advice you gave. But it says, get wisdom, get understanding. Don't forget or turn away from the words from my mouth. Don't abandon wisdom, and she will watch over you. Love her, and she will guard you. Wisdom is supreme, so get wisdom. And then, I want particularly to look down in verse 10 and following. It says, listen, my son, accept my words, and you will live many years. So, and again, this is Proverbs, so it's not necessarily promising you that you'll all live to be old if you just follow these verses. But what it's saying is, wisdom has a way of following you over time. Wisdom is proven over time. And so many years later, you're going to look back and you're going to realize, yeah, my dad gave me some great advice. And it's proven true for me for a long time. And so then I want to really zero in on verse 11 and following. It says, I am teaching you the way of wisdom. I am guiding you on straight paths. And I want to just kind of highlight that concept of straight paths. Because, of course, everyone's life is a journey. And we all are going to follow a path of some kind in our life. And the concept of a straight path means it's a path that you make progress in. It's not a winding path. It's not a difficult uphill climb of a path. A straight path means that it's straightforward. It gets you it moves you somewhere. You stay in that straight path for very long, and you're going to have advanced forward. And so what he's saying is, I'm going to give you wisdom that will help you get ahead, and not just wealth-wise, but it's going to help you to advance in your life, in your manhood. And it says, when you walk, your steps will not be hindered. When you run, you will not stumble. And, we just know so many people that because of their upbringing, they came out of their childhood home crippled. They came out of their childhood home with all kinds of baggage. And they're still going down the path of life, but they're carrying this baggage, this weight. They're constantly having to fight to overcome stuff that happened as they were growing up. And I've often thought, I think most people, if not all people, get out of their childhood home with some baggage of some kind. I think we're all having to sort of process some of that, unless we were just very, very fortunate. But I think one of the things that a good dad does is tries to minimize the baggage and instead tries to do everything possible as a dad to set their children on a straight, smooth path, so that they don't have to spend a bunch of time and energy and focus just trying to overcome childhood wounds and trauma, confusion, mixed messages. But they can be launched and right away begin moving forward in a positive direction. And so it says, and if you get put on the right path, now if you get put on a path that's got littered with all kinds of obstacles and potholes and slippery places, then you're going to be trying to move forward, but you're going to be always having to be careful. It's going to be dangerous. There'll be lots of things that can trip you up. But if you get put on the right path that's smooth and unencumbered, now you can make progress. It says, when you run, you will not stumble. So hold on to instruction. Don't let go. Guard it, for it's your life. Keep off the path of the wicked. Don't proceed on the way of evil ones. Avoid it. Don't travel on it. Turn away from it. For they can't sleep unless they have done what is evil. They are robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. They eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. The path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, shining brighter and brighter until midday. But the way of the wicked is like the darkest gloom. They don't know what makes them stumble. And so I that idea of a path, and the fact that as a dad, you're helping to put people on a path. And you can put people on a path of wickedness. You can put your kids on a path that's going to lead to their destruction. You can put kids, you can kind of launch them onto a path of self-centeredness, of victimhood, of pride, all kinds of paths. And I feel like the role of a dad is trying to get each of your kids onto a healthy, good path that they can really make progress on. And the world, of course, is going to tempt them with all kinds of evil paths that lead to destruction, that lead to nowhere. And, of course, that's so much of the temptation of the great Christian classic of Pilgrim's Progress talks about trying to stay on the right path and often being deterred and distracted and tempted away from that. And so of course, we can't walk with our kids necessarily their whole life. We can't be there every time they're making a decision. But while you have those kids in your home and you teach them how to choose wise paths and to stay on those paths and not be sidetracked from those. That's what I think a lot of fathering is. And so I was just trying to think in my own life, just kind of what that looks like. And there's a lot, of course, whenever I think about my dad, again, I have to say he wasn't perfect. There are things he did that, they weren't in his wheelhouse, that his dad never put him on those paths either. So he had a hard time putting his kids on them. But there were some things that he did. And, Bob, I would also just say that a word to dads to say, I think sometimes, and one of the reasons why I think it's good to have a Mother's Day and Father's Day is to value the role of a mother or a father. Mm-hmm. I think society now, we so minimize that, we downplay it, and certainly for women, there's been a huge movement to say, if you can't go out and earn a living or have a career, I guess you could always be a mom, And yet, and for a dad, there might be, you might be someone that never did make it to be the CEO of your company. You might never have accumulated all those millions that you hoped you would. You might never have, ended up with a huge house or whatever. And so many ways that the world measures success, you might not have achieved those. But don't ever minimize the power that you have to influence human beings, eternal human beings, and helping them to choose godly, righteous paths that take them somewhere. If you've got 3 or 4 kids and you walk, how much responsibility is that to be given several lives, and the responsibility to help them not take bad paths, but to take righteous ones. And so I love that idea of launching each of the kids that you have. And even later, even if it's not your primary responsibility as a grandparent, to be a part of the process and trying to encourage grandkids when it comes to choosing their path as well. But I was thinking about just some of those paths my dad put me on. And I'm sure I've shared this before, but I remember one of my memories with my dad. And he was a busy guy. He was in high demand. He traveled a lot. So, he wasn't home every night, especially later in life as he got more and more famous. But I've also found with dads, it's about making memories. And sometimes it's there is something about quantity of time, but that quality of time where if you are going to invest in your kids, make it memorable. And so I remember one time, and I was older then, but I think I was probably in college, but I'd come home for Christmas, and my dad took me with him to a used bookstore, and he launched me with the love of books, and of course it was a classic used bookstore, stacks of books all over the place, and you'd have to dig down. Of course, some fair weather book searchers had looked on the surface, dug down 2 or 3 books in a pile and moved on, but the nuggets, the treasures were further down in the back, and you had to work to find them. And then my dad, literally he acted like he just found a nugget of gold. Like he would pull out a book and say, "Oh, Richard," he said, "this is a classic right here. And they're only charging $1 for this. This is a steal." And this writer, and he'd start telling me about this particular author, and he would say, "Richard, just anytime you find a book by this guy, just get it. It's worth it. It'll bless you. And I just try to fill your library with this caliber of person." And we keep on looking, then we find another book. And I remember by the time we're done, I literally had this stack of books I'm trying to balance carrying out the door. I'm not sure my dad got any books for himself. He was just delighted to help me find all these treasures. And I still have all those books. I still have in my library to this day. And of course, when I, years later, had 3 kids of my own, I took them. And I remember in Calgary, where we used to live, there was 3 bookstores, used bookstores on 3 blocks. And there's just something about used books. You can get new books, but for that, you just click on Amazon. You don't have to drive somewhere. It's probably cheaper to get them from Amazon anyway. But used books, and some of them might only be a month or two old, but someone's already read them and delivered them to a used bookstore, and now you can get a $25 book for $2, and there's just something thrilling, and classics that are out of print, and then you find them, and so
there's a hunt nature to a used bookstore,
and so it's funny because now, as you know, Sam, all three of my kids love books, and even now when we're on a vacation somewhere, that's like a pretty well a ritual that we'll find a used bookstore near. We could be on the beach somewhere in Florida and still have to take time off from the beach to go find some dusty used bookstore. And now we're bringing the grandkids, and they're finding books. And I'm thinking, my dad put me on this path years ago, and it's not just about accumulating books. It's about valuing books, and then valuing reading. And if you get on the path of reading, if you can teach your kids to be good at reading, to be able to comprehend what they read, to read critically, so you don't just consume whatever it is that someone is saying, but you learn to analyze what's being said. If you can be taught to think, now that's a path of wisdom. And so many people, you see this particularly on social media now. I mean, somebody just posts some theory that is rife with all kinds of holes in it and inconsistencies, but a lot of people have never really learned to read properly, and so they just take it all hook, line, and sinker. And so I just think to myself, that was one of those paths my dad just kind of gently put me on, the path of reading, of valuing books. And of course now me and all my kids have libraries in their houses because we value books. But I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that path that I got started on. If I know full well, I can trace perfectly well where I got that love from, and I know because I one day helped sort out my grandfather's library. My dad's dad, he was a book collector, and I have one of my grandfather's bookshelves. I've got pictures of him, and he would sit in his library in the evenings and just enjoy reading and writing and thinking, and now I sit there in my library doing the same thing. And so I know it goes back as far as my grandfather and probably beyond that.
Yeah.
I got put on a path that my family's been on for generations. And
well, I want to just highlight one aspect of that really stands out to me, and that is he could have just said, Richard, reading is important and you're going to read.
Yeah, and I hope they teach you that at school.
Yeah, just sit you down, like, you're going to read this summer. You got to read. You don't have a choice. But to see how he brought you to that is, you saw the delight in reading that your dad received. And when he's excited about showing you something and, hey, this is a great author, this is a great book, he gets excited. I think that is so much more powerful for a child than just being told, you read this book because it's good for you.
Yeah.
But when you see the joy that your parent gets from that, or the excitement that your dad gets from, oh, you got to read this, or, bringing you on that journey rather than just telling you this is a good journey, it'll be good for you. I think that is probably the difference between folks like yourself who end up on that journey and find the value in it, and folks who just don't.
Yeah.
And I think that can be taken not just in reading, but so whatever it is you want your kids to value, do you value that? And do you express that in being delighted in whatever that thing is?
And I've shared before, that means we told our kids when they were growing up, if they would read it, we would buy it for them. And so that, that could be expensive sometimes for us, but because they buy a brand new book. But if they're reading a series of 10 books or 6 books, whatever, that meant that I was willing to put my money into that and to say, I do value your reading. And if you enjoy it, you're reading it, then I'm going to keep buying you those books. And so yeah, that to put your treasure there says this is important. And maybe just two other paths my dad put me on. Another path was my dad just always chose to make a positive difference. My dad he got on the path of saying, I'm not going to complain all the time because people don't do things for me, that people don't solve my problems, that people don't just make my world better. Everywhere my dad went, he had the attitude, God can certainly help me make this company, this church, this association better as a result. And so I just never heard my dad, there's pathways of complaining that you can go on. Those kind of homes where you can grow up in a home where you hear your parents complain all the time about maybe a political party or a current president or the mayor of the town or the person that's running the HOA that we live in, or the school principal or the pastor of our church. And you know what that's like, where they just always and I've seen those families where oftentimes it's the dad and he sits in his recliner and he pontificates about why everyone is so stupid and all of his opinions about that. And I just never heard my dad do that. And I just feel like there's a lot of people quite handicapped because, or maybe, there are people that they treasured getting a steal of a deal. If they could rip someone off and they could go to a garage sale, and even though the prices were already ridiculously low, they would just out of principle have to still negotiate it even further down, and then they would just take great delight in how much they ripped off this person. And there's a certain path that you put people on where you just you value things, possessions, you value never having to pay full price for anything, or it's all about how much money you saved or how much you made. And I think sometimes we don't realize we're putting our kids on certain paths. And so, and if you are the kind of person that always, there are homes where the dad tries to do the least possible. How can I do the least possible and get the most value for it? And how can I get other people to give me a handout? What can I get for free? And with all of that, I think, especially when it goes to an extreme, you're putting your kids on a path that is going to take them maybe the rest of their life with certain attitudes and approaches that might really cripple them. And so, like I said, with my dad, I remember one time, just so many times, like my dad would go to really tough places, tough churches, tough situations, and he never was like, who's going to fix this for me? Who can I, reach out to that'll make my life better? It was always just, so what's God going to do next? And God would just start making things better. And God would provide answers to prayer, and God would address issues. And so I just watched my dad never get discouraged by being in a tough place, because his attitude always was, well, it's tough now, but it won't always be tough. God's going to make it better. And then things would just start getting better. And so I began to go down that path. My brothers did. And I can there's just so many stories I could tell of me and my family going to tough places, hard places. But our dad put us on that path early on to say, don't show up somewhere tough and then just complain because your situation is hard. Just say, all right, wow, like I wonder what God's going to do here. Like, wonder how God's going to fix this. And again, I know that I got that because my dad put me on that path, and he just would not tolerate me coming home and then just complaining about how bad my boss was and how bad my job was and how much I hated the work I did. It would immediately, he would say, well, you know, basically you're on the wrong path then. Get on a path of being positive and expectant. And then maybe just the last one is just, of course, my dad modeled for me cherishing time alone with God, especially in the mornings. And we've talked lots about this, but that was certainly a path. And again, my dad never made us get up early. He never told us, you boys get up by 6 a.m, and I want you to have an hour-long quiet time. You know, he never forced us to do that. He just modeled that. No matter how early I would get up in the morning, he'd already be up, and he'd have his books around him and his Bible, and you could just tell he had savored that time, the quietness of the morning, before all the noise and interruptions, and just him and God. And he and God had just had this special time, and he had all kinds of notes of what God had said. And I just saw that was a choice he made every morning, to get on that path of quietness with God, and just starting out his day hearing what God had to say. And then and of course that's a path you take. That's a choice that you make every day. And there's just something also I've just found. It doesn't mean that late risers are always lazy, but there does seem to be something telling about early risers, that when you get up early, it just means you're getting you're getting your day started soon, and you're going after it early. You're not. I just know people, they're sort of sluggishly moving through till about brunch time. They're not really very effective.
There's certainly a proactive nature in getting up before you need to be out the door.
Yeah, and to savor that, like there used to be a time where if I woke up at like 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, I'd think, what a waste. It's Saturday. I can sleep in. Like, why would I get up at 6? Now, I think Saturday or two ago, I think I woke up at 5:15, and I just thought, like, I'm here all day long. Like, I could easily roll over, but man, there's a lot of stuff I want to read and think about and study, and I'm awake, so why don't I just get up? And so I'm sitting there at my desk by 5:30 with a steaming hot cup of Tim Hortons coffee. My Bible's open, and I'm thinking I've got all day before me just to study and think, and the quietness of my study. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? Years ago, my dad started me on this path, and I've got a full day ahead of me. But I'm just in the quietness with God, just to have some noble thoughts, some inspiring thoughts about God first, but I realize so many times I'll stop and I'll think, but I know where I got this from. I mean, I'm modifying it and customizing it to my personality, my temperament. I'm not just completely copying my dad, but he put me on this basic path of saying, rise early, get an early start to your day, start your day with God, and when you're way down your path years later, you're going to look back and realize, early on, my dad just got me on that path of getting up early in the morning, starting it out with God, thinking and reflecting and praying over your day. And now, decades later, I realize he was right, and I'm so grateful for that path. And so, there's some paths that, because of just the nature of our dad, we didn't get put on the best paths available. There's some we're going to have to do some course corrections along the way. But also, I think, just maybe lastly, just to say, that's one of the reasons I think, and I mean, I know some people don't have good role models for dads, some absentee dads, but for the average person, I think we can look and realize, and that's why I think, have a Father's Day. I think that's why we honor our dads, because, we didn't get everywhere that we are today just on our own. A lot of what we do, for you, you're a great fixer and handyman, and you have a lot of skills I wish I had, but that's because you had the dad you had, and I had the dad I had. Yeah. My dad never taught me to use a screwdriver to fix anything. He just didn't put me on that path. I wish he had, but as I've shared, he put me on some other paths and so, when I think sometimes it's pride to think, I'm just a self-made man. I'm the one who's just done all this and gotten where I am. And of course, we do play a huge role in where we end up, and because we're making decisions, but some of, at least where we are today, you can trace back and say, because when I was 5, my dad was already putting me on this path and modeling for me this path and making it attractive to me. And so you may have gone further than your dad. You might have made modifications along the way, but I think it never hurts sometimes, I think, just in humility, to take a look at where you are today and say, but years ago, before I had much sense to know one way from the other, my mom or my dad put me on this path, and it was a great decision to be on this path, and I've made lots of progress over the years as a result, and I'm grateful for it. And so if our listeners are parents, especially if you're a dad today, take a moment and just reflect. So what are some of the paths that I've been putting my kids on? And maybe not consciously, but I have been. I've been either by my actions, negatively or positively, I've been putting my kids on some paths. And if they continue on those paths for the next 20, 30, 40 years, will I have blessed them, or will I have cursed them? Be careful and make sure that you put your kids on some good paths. And so even when you're not walking with them, perhaps for years to come, years later, they'll still be singing your praises because they got put on some healthy, good paths that have taken them a long ways.
Well, thank you, Richard, for taking us down this path of Father's Day. And we'll wish a happy Father's Day to all the fathers who do listen. And until next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.